We now look at the final shared features 9 through 16 of tribal religion, and we start out with something that is very familiar to many of us, at least in terms of the word, and that idea is magic. Um, Notice that white magic is the use of words or incantations or objects for the benefit of yourself or your tribe. Consequently, black magic is the same use of words or objects or incantations for the detriment of someone else or their tribe. Notice it uses very precise formulas and so forth. And in many ways, it is connected with that idea of morality, which says that words have power. Now, a lot of magic is sympathetic magic, whether it be a voodoo doll or whether it be a rain dance, whether it be the king of Babylon sleeping with his concubines on top of the ziggurat to ensure the fertility of his people. The idea is that on this small scale, you're imitating what it is you want to have happen in your lives. Now, a lot of times uh, we don't practice as much sympathetic or imitative magic as we do what we would call superstitions. Life is at best a roll of the dice in the sense that we can't always control everything that goes on in our lives. But many of us are superstitious and will have lucky coins or rabbit foots, or we'll have superstitions, particularly if we are a sports figure. Divination, as we see here, is any means of predicting the future. Now, in times past, when a Roman general was getting ready to go into battle, it wasn't unusual for him to have the accompanying priest sacrifice an animal, a bull, and then the priest would look at the entrails you see here, the lungs or the heart or the liver of a sacrificed animal in India. And based on what that priest saw, he would either receive an omen for victory the next day or for curse. And so he would say, why don't you wait another day until the omens are better? The Chinese had a way of foretelling the future. Notice this tortoise shell. When you heat this tortoise shell up, it will form particular crack patterns. And you'll find that the Chinese had a lot of little scrolls which would detail these particular crack patterns. And you could, again, much like the Roman omens, you could have an idea about whether you should proceed or not. Much more common in today's generation is that of the psychic or the clairvoyant. This is a picture of Miss Cleo, who was a very popular late night personality when many of you were very young. And so these types of individuals, because they have contact with the spirit world or the psychic world, they would have an idea about whether or not person should take this job or who they might marry, what their future might hold, and so forth. If you're going to have magic, then you're also going to have sacred persons. And these are those individuals that function as specialists in those sacred things, whether it be the medicine man in Native American tribes, who not only knew medicinal herbs and ways to bring healing to people, but also were the storyteller, or whether it be a person in an African tribe, a shaman, who could determine who has hexed or cursed a particular family. So the range of these figures is quite large and is very prevalent across the world. Notice also that if you were a king, for much of human history, the priest king was popular. We see this in like this picture of one of the pharaohs' caskets. Uh, the reason that you didn't want to bump off Pharaoh was because he was the direct representative of the sun god to the people, and the representative of the people to the sun god. In much the same way that in later Israelite history, David would not kill Saul because Saul was God's anointed. So diviners or shamans function in that role as being the spiritual specialist. And not only do they journey into the spirit world, but they're also known for their value to the community in being the storytellers and in being those that have some knowledge of what the spirits are saying. Another interesting thing that we don't talk about very much is a thing called mana. It's a Polynesian word which talks about the hidden or secret force operating silently and in the background with socially important people. We might call it charisma, but it's more than that. I remember hearing a story once about a president-elect who has not yet taken office and was still serving in another government position. And when that person walked into the room, they had such charisma that every head in the room turned. And we're not talking necessarily just about that, but we're kind of hinting at that idea. Perhaps an even better illustration in the modern world would be that of music celebrities or movie celebrities. Let's say that you are an adolescent and you get backstage passes and a front row concert seats for your favorite boy band, and then afterwards that you shake hands with them, or you get a bus on the cheek or something like that, and you almost faint, because you say, "I'm never going to wash this hand again." That type of thing is what we're hinting at. This mana is particularly important in many tribal religions because the world was filled with power. Um, you can see this lightning strike here, and I really would like for you to get the idea that for many tribal worldviews, the world was not a safe place. There was lots of power out there, lots of it. And it wasn't like going to the Oak Ridge Science Museum and placing your hand on that ball and having the static electricity raise your hair and cause it to float. This is like pulling one of the TVA power transmission lines off of one of those towers, and it's snapping and popping and sparking, and someone coming up and saying, "Here, you want to touch?" That kind of power that you have. So, take for example the Ifugao of the Philippines. 40 categories of divinities, 1,500 different supernatural beings. The Yoruba, 400 gods and goddesses. When you've got that kind of power, you need to have somebody who knows what they're doing to be a specialist in being able to handle that kind of power. Notice what Codrington says here. Mana, he says, it resides in tribal chieftains and so forth, and all Melanesian religion consists in one way or another of getting this mana for yourself or getting it used for your benefit. Now, when we're talking about power, most of us think about the supreme deity, the Almighty. But for most tribal religions, the Almighty, if present, and it's not unusual for the Almighty, the supreme God, the high God, to be acknowledged, that deity is not always thought of as being intimately involved with the affairs of the world. You don't see him worshiped very much. You appeal to this God, usually a male God, only as a last resort, because, as this slide says, if you trouble him too much, you're only asking for trouble. So what you do is you go with the lesser deities, the nature deities. In Africa, they're called the Orishas. and you would go with them, and they would be your primary mediaries of power, mediators of power. So most of your effort in terms of worship and contact is with these lesser deities. Notice the Ela of Central Zambia say God has nowhere and no when that he comes to an end. Even the Lakota Sioux are saying Wankantanka was everywhere all the time and observed everything. If you got this kind of power and you have orishas and high gods and this type of thing and mana, then you're also going to have taboos. And taboos are simply actions that you avoid in order that the spirit world not release harmful bad stuff on you or your tribe, because you or your tribe has crossed a line and let these tremendous forces into your world. There are cultural taboos. For example, in Thailand, you never point your shoe or foot at another person because that's considered to be an unclean part of the body. Many African countries, when you're talking to a tribal chief, you make sure that your head is not above his. In Indonesia, you never eat while standing. In Austria, Italy, Germany, and Malaysia, never chew gum in public. In Japan, don't point with your chopsticks. In Spain, it's a taboo to stretch or yawn in public. In China, there's no 14th floor. In America, there's usually no 13th floor. So if you have these taboos, then you need to have some way of restoring folks back. Now, the taboos I mentioned are just cultural tradition, but there are other taboos such as incest and adultery and that type of thing. So once these taboos are broken, you need to have some way to restore the person or the tribe back to wholeness, and that's why you have purification rites. The whole community, not just the taboo breaker, the whole community is put into jeopardy. And so oftentimes these taboo breakers are ostracized, they're placed outside the village and so forth until they can be ritually purified. Usually also there's some type of sacrifice. As this slide shows, it's one of the most common practices in all the religions of the world. It is a means of feeding the residents of the spirit world. Some folks will do it to communicate their desires and needs and to propitiate or to calm the spirits. And the more momentous the occasion, the more likely you are to have a blood sacrifice taking place. So, firstling rites. Usually, what happens is if hunters and fishers come along, they would give the first fruits, the best part, say a tithe or 10% to the gods, and then the remaining 90% is used for the worshiper. Human sacrifice was rare, but it usually occurred and was often accompanied by ritual cannibalism and headhunting. Again, the headhunting and the cannibalism here, it's not just because people like the taste of human flesh. That's oftentimes not the point. The real point is that you've got powerful forces that are seeking to bring chaos into this world. And only through these sacrifices and only through this gaining of mana can that chaos be resisted. We come to number 17, which is rites of passage. These rituals signify the end of certain periods of our life and the beginning of new ones. There are 4 of them, as you can see. These are the most common passages in a person's life. You'll see birth, for example, marked by birthdays and baby showers. You'll see puberty in some Latino cultures marked by quinceañera, the nice celebration as a young lady turns 15. In some tribal cultures, you'll see when the puberty is recognized by scarification or trials or circumcision. In the Jewish tradition, you'll have the bar mitzvah at about age 12 or 13 for a boy, and about 11 or 12, the bar mitzvah for the young lady. The marriage obviously marks the end of the single life and the beginning of married life, and of course, death. And each of these significant points is marked by significant social rituals. And they emphasize, as we said earlier, the transition from the old status to the new status. And it's not unusual if there's some type of reenactment of the sacred story there. And usually, particularly in the tribal areas, you'll have ordeals or trials, as we said earlier, with the circumcision in the case of males. You also might, in the North American tradition, have a vision quest at about this time where the young boy is taken off and into an area, and they are to remain there fasting, praying, and so forth. And then with the visions or dreams that they have, they'll come back to the community and tell the elders the visions and dreams they had. And based on the visions and dreams they had, the community gives the boy a new name. For most tribal cultures, life is a series of initiations. So it's not just this one-time thing, but a series of initiations in which new meaning and new rights and new privileges are bestowed. We finish up here with the final one, which is Ancestor Veneration. Most often in a tribal tradition, this is seen where, for example, in the African tradition, the elders, the ancestors are seen as those who give children to newlyweds and so forth. And that ancestor veneration in Asian cultures is a way of recognizing the significant role of the ancestors in the lives of these folks. This is something that we don't talk about very much in our current culture. Most of us do well to remember anywhere beyond our grandparents. If I were to ask you how many of you can name all 8 of your great-grandparents, many of us would struggle to even be able to name 2 to 3 of them. But in many cultures, the remembering the dead is extremely important. So remember, the living dead, as we see here, the living dead, the ancestors, are not the walking dead. So if the living dead are remembered, a proper relationship with them is maintained, health and prosperity are the result. However, if the living dead, those who are ancestors who preceded us, if they are not recognized, then they are offended and disease and misfortune result. We finish here with this quote from the Lugbara tribe of Uganda. Notice what they say about the ancestors. They are our fathers, and we are their children whom they've begotten. Those that have died stay near us in our homes, and we feed and respect them.